Marcus Thompson sat quietly in the corner booth of Milano's restaurant, cutting small pieces of chicken for his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. The Friday evening crowd filled the upscale dining room with gentle chatter and clinking glasses. Emma giggled as she told him about her school play auditions, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Daddy, Mrs. Peterson says I might get the lead role as the princess," Emma whispered. Leaning across the table conspiratorially, Marcus smiled, his heart warming at her enthusiasm. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You've been practicing so hard." He adjusted his simple button-down shirt, feeling slightly out of place among the well-dressed clientele. But Emma had specifically requested this restaurant after seeing it in a movie, and Marcus would do anything to make his daughter happy. 2 tables away, Richard Hawthorne, CEO of Hawthorne Industries, spoke loudly into his phone. His expensive suit and gold watch caught the restaurant's ambient lighting as he gestured dramatically. "I don't care what the union says. We're cutting another 200 jobs by month's end," he declared, his voice carrying across the dining room. Several diners glanced over disapprovingly at his volume and harsh words. Marcus noticed the conversation but focused on Emma, who was now drawing princesses on her napkin with a crayon the waitress had brought her. "The shareholders want results, not excuses," Hawthorne continued, oblivious to the uncomfortable looks from nearby tables. "These workers are replaceable. Find younger, cheaper employees or outsource the whole department to India." Marcus watched as 3 men at the bar turned to stare at Hawthorne. Their faces showed growing anger with each callous statement. The tallest man, wearing a worn work jacket, clenched his fists. His companions, equally rough-looking, whispered urgently among themselves. "Daddy, why is that man talking so mean about people's jobs?" Emma asked innocently, having overheard parts of the conversation. Marcus gently took her hand. "Some people forget that their words can hurt others, honey. But we don't need to worry about that. Tell me more about your princess costume ideas." As Emma launched into detailed descriptions of tiaras and flowing dresses, Marcus kept one eye on the 3 men at the bar. Their body language grew increasingly aggressive. The shortest man with a thick beard pointed toward Hawthorne, saying something that made his friends nod grimly. Hawthorne ended his call and immediately dialed another number. "Johnson? It's Hawthorne. I want you to personally deliver the termination letters Monday morning. Start with the oldest employees. They cost us the most in benefits anyway." The 3 men stood up from their bar stools simultaneously. Marcus felt a familiar tension creep up his spine, an instinct he hadn't experienced in years. His military training, dormant for so long, began to stir. He recognized the signs, the way they moved, their coordinated glances, the determination in their postures. "Emma, sweetie, I need you to slide over to that side of the booth and stay very quiet for a moment," Marcus said gently, his voice remaining calm despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his veins. "Why, Daddy?" Emma asked, but she moved as instructed, sensing something in her father's tone that meant business. "Just a precaution, Princess. Keep coloring your picture." The tallest man approached Hawthorne's table first, his friends flanking him on either side. Other diners began to notice the tension, conversations dying down as the 3 men positioned themselves around the CEO's table. "Excuse me, Mr. Hawthorne," the tall man said, his voice barely controlled. "We couldn't help but overhear your conversation." Hawthorne looked up from his phone with annoyance. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "I'm having a private dinner here." "Private?" The bearded man laughed bitterly. "You were loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear how you're destroying people's lives." The 3rd man, younger but with the same hard look in his eyes, stepped closer. "My father worked at your plant for 30 years before you fired him last month. 30 years of loyalty and you threw him away like garbage." Marcus stood up slowly, his movements careful and measured. He kissed Emma's forehead. "Stay right here, baby. Daddy will be back in just a minute. Are you leaving me?" Emma's eyes widened with concern. "Never," Marcus promised, his voice firm. "I'm just going to help someone who might need it." "You're the bravest princess in the kingdom, remember?" Emma nodded solemnly, clutching her crayon drawing of princesses. The situation at Hawthorne's table escalated quickly. The CEO stood up, his face red with indignation. "How dare you approach me? Do you know who I am?" "Yeah, we know exactly who you are," the tall man snarled. "You're the guy who's been destroying our community, one job at a time." Other restaurant patrons began moving away from the confrontation, some pulling out phones to record or call for help. The waitstaff looked uncertain, clearly unprepared for this kind of situation. Marcus moved closer, staying in the shadows between tables. His daughter's safety was his first priority, but something about the brewing violence troubled him deeply. Years of single parenthood had taught him that sometimes good people had to step up when others couldn't or wouldn't. The three men closed in tighter around Hawthorne, their intentions becoming unmistakably threatening. The CEO's arrogance began to crack as he realized his precarious position. "Security," Hawthorne called out, looking around desperately. But Milano's was an upscale restaurant, not a nightclub. They had no security personnel on duty. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He thought of Emma, safe in their booth, and knew he couldn't let her witness violence if he could prevent it. More importantly, he couldn't let her grow up thinking her father stood by and did nothing when someone needed help. Even someone as unlikable as Richard Hawthorne. The tension in Milano's restaurant reached a breaking point as the three angry men surrounded Richard Hawthorne's table. The tall man grabbed Hawthorne by his expensive tie, yanking him forward. "You think you can destroy families and just walk away?" he hissed through clenched teeth. "My brother lost his house because of you. His kids had to change schools." Hawthorne struggled against the grip, his face turning red. "Let go of me." "This is assault." The bearded man laughed coldly. "Assault? What do you call what you've been doing to our town? You've assaulted our entire way of life." Other diners scrambled to get out of the way, chairs scraping against the floor as people moved to safer distances. Some headed for the exit while others pulled out their phones. The restaurant manager appeared from the kitchen, his face pale with panic. "Please, gentlemen, let's all calm down," the manager pleaded, wringing his hands. "I'll call the police if this doesn't stop immediately." "Good," the youngest attacker said. "Maybe they can arrest him for what he's done to our families." Marcus watched from his position near a marble pillar, calculating distances and angles. His military training kicked in automatically, assessing threats and potential solutions. He could see Emma in his peripheral vision, still coloring but occasionally looking up with worried eyes. The situation deteriorated rapidly when the tall man shoved Hawthorne hard against the wall. The CEO's expensive wineglass shattered on the floor, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. "Please," Hawthorne gasped, his arrogance finally giving way to genuine fear. "I was just doing business. It's nothing personal." "Nothing personal?" The bearded man's voice rose to a shout. "Tell that to the 50 families you destroyed last month. Tell that to the kids who won't have Christmas presents this year because their parents lost their jobs." The youngest man picked up a steak knife from Hawthorne's table, and Marcus knew he had to act. Violence was about to escalate beyond mere threats. "Gentlemen," Marcus said calmly, stepping into the light. His voice carried a natural authority that made all three attackers turn toward him. "I think we all need to take a step back here." The tall man kept his grip on Hawthorne but glared at Marcus. "This isn't your business, buddy. Walk away." Marcus held up his hands peacefully, showing he wasn't armed or threatening. "You're right, it's not my business. But my 8-year-old daughter is sitting right over there and she doesn't need to see anyone get hurt tonight." "Then take her and leave," the bearded man snapped. "This bastard has it coming." "Maybe he does," Marcus agreed, surprising everyone. "But not like this. Not in front of children, not in a way that destroys your own lives too." The young man with the knife wavered slightly. "You don't understand what he's done to us?" Marcus stepped closer, his movements slow and non-threatening. "Actually, I might understand better than you think. I lost my job 3 years ago when my company downsized. My wife had just passed away from cancer, and suddenly I was a single father with no income and a pile of medical bills." The three men exchanged glances, their anger momentarily tempered by this revelation. "But you know what I learned?" Marcus continued, his voice gentle but firm. "Destroying someone else doesn't rebuild what you've lost. It just creates more destruction." Hawthorne, still pressed against the wall, looked at Marcus with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. He clearly hadn't expected a defender to emerge from the crowd, especially one who acknowledged his faults. "Easy words from someone who probably landed on his feet," the tall man said. Though his voice lacked its earlier venom, Marcus shook his head. "I didn't land on my feet. I'm still working 2 jobs to make ends meet. I stock shelves at night after my day job at a warehouse. Some weeks Emma and I eat peanut butter sandwiches for dinner because that's all we can afford." The restaurant fell silent except for the soft clinking of glasses from nervous waiters clearing abandoned tables. Even Hawthorne stopped struggling, listening to Marcus's words. "But here's the thing," Marcus continued. "Emma doesn't know we're poor. She knows she's loved. She knows her daddy would do anything for her. She knows that being a good person matters more than having money." The young man slowly lowered the knife, his hand shaking slightly. "So we're just supposed to let him get away with ruining lives?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "You hold him accountable, but you do it the right way. You organize. You protest, you vote. You make noise that can't be ignored. You don't throw your own lives away on 5 minutes of revenge." The bearded man's shoulders slumped. "Nothing we do legally makes any difference. He's too rich, too connected." Marcus nodded sympathetically. "I understand that frustration. But look around this room. Look at all these people recording with their phones. This conversation is going to be all over social media in an hour. Mr. Hawthorne's callous words about firing people and treating workers like garbage, that's going to follow him everywhere now." For the first time, Hawthorne looked genuinely uncomfortable about something other than his physical safety. The power of modern communication meant his reputation could be damaged far more effectively than any physical assault. Sometimes the best revenge is letting someone destroy themselves with their own words and actions, Marcus added. "And you three? You walk away from this as the better men. You go home to your families with your dignity and your freedom intact." The tall man finally released his grip on Hawthorne's tie. The CEO stumbled slightly but remained standing, adjusting his rumpled clothes with shaking hands. "This isn't over," the bearded man warned Hawthorne. "The whole town knows what kind of man you are now." Marcus stepped between the groups, creating a buffer zone. "It doesn't have to continue either. Mr. Hawthorne, these men have legitimate grievances. Their community is hurting because of decisions made in boardrooms far from the consequences." Hawthorne straightened his tie, his composure slowly returning. "I don't discuss business with random strangers." The dangerous glint returned to the eyes of all three attackers, and Marcus realized his intervention had only bought temporary peace. Hawthorne's dismissive response reignited the fury in the three men's eyes. The temporary calm Marcus had created evaporated instantly. "Random strangers," the tall man snarled, lunging forward again. "We're the people whose lives you destroyed." This time all three men moved simultaneously. The bearded man grabbed Hawthorne's left arm while the youngest seized his right. The tall man drew back his fist, aiming directly for the CEO's face. Marcus moved with lightning speed that surprised everyone in the restaurant. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward and caught the tall man's wrist just before impact. His grip was firm but controlled, the move of someone with serious training. "I said that's enough," Marcus stated calmly. But his voice now carried an unmistakable edge of authority that hadn't been there before. The tall man tried to pull free but found himself unable to break Marcus's grip. "Let me go. This doesn't concern you." "It became my concern when you decided to commit assault in front of my daughter," Marcus replied. His other hand moved with practiced precision, applying pressure to a nerve point that made the bearded man immediately release Hawthorne's arm with a yelp of surprise. The youngest attacker, still holding Hawthorne's right arm, stared at Marcus in shock. "What the hell? How did you do that?" Marcus gently but firmly guided the tall man's arm down to his side before releasing his wrist. 10 years in the Army, Special Forces. I really hoped I wouldn't need to use any of that tonight." The three men backed away slightly, suddenly reassessing the quiet man in the simple shirt and worn jeans. Other diners who had been recording the confrontation now turned their cameras toward Marcus. Sensing the story was taking an unexpected turn, Hawthorne rubbed his freed arms, looking between Marcus and his would-be attackers with newfound confusion. "You're military? Then why are you protecting these thugs?" "I'm not protecting anyone," Marcus corrected. "I'm trying to prevent a situation where everyone loses. These men lose their freedom and futures. You lose your safety and possibly your life. And my daughter loses her faith that adults can solve problems without violence." The tall man squared his shoulders defiantly. "Your military training doesn't change what this bastard has done to our families." "No, it doesn't," Marcus agreed. "But it does mean I understand something about fighting. Real fighting isn't about anger or revenge. It's about protecting what matters most. And right now, what matters most is making sure everyone goes home safely tonight." The restaurant manager approached cautiously. "The police are on their way. Perhaps we should all just wait for them to arrive." "The police?" The youngest man's face went pale. "We can't get arrested." I've got a family to support. Exactly, Marcus said gently. Which is why we need to end this now before it becomes a criminal matter. Hawthorne straightened his jacket with renewed arrogance. Oh, it's already a criminal matter. I'm pressing charges against all three of these men for assault and harassment. The bearded man took a threatening step forward, but Marcus smoothly positioned himself between them again. This time his stance was subtly different, more balanced, more ready. The three attackers recognized the change immediately. Mr. Hawthorne, Marcus said, his voice still calm but carrying a note of steel. That would be unwise. Unwise? They attacked me. Everyone saw it. Marcus nodded slowly. Everyone also saw you loudly discussing firing hundreds of workers, calling them replaceable, and showing complete disregard for the families you're destroying. Everyone heard you talk about targeting older employees specifically to save money on benefits. The color drained from Hawthorne's face as he realized the implication. In about 10 minutes, Marcus continued, videos of this entire encounter will be uploaded to every social media platform imaginable. The story won't be 3 men attack CEO. It'll be heartless CEO's cruel comments spark restaurant confrontation. Several people in the crowd nodded, still holding up their recording phones. Your shareholders, your board of directors, your customers. They're all going to see exactly what kind of person you are, Marcus said. Now you can make this worse by pressing charges and keeping this story in the news cycle for months. Or you can handle this like a businessman who understands damage control. Hawthorne looked around the room, finally noticing all the phones pointed in his direction. His expression shifted from outrage to calculation. The tall man watched this exchange with growing respect for Marcus. You're not just protecting him, are you? You're protecting all of us. I'm trying to, Marcus admitted. But I need everyone to make smart choices here. Emma's small voice carried across the restaurant from their booth. Daddy, are you okay? Marcus turned and gave her a reassuring wave. I'm fine, Princess. Just helping some people work out a disagreement. The sight of the little girl seemed to deflate the remaining aggression in the three men. They looked at each other, then back at Marcus, who was clearly torn between his responsibility to his daughter and his commitment to preventing further violence. Look, the bearded man said quietly, we never meant for this to get so out of hand. We're so angry, you know. Our whole town is falling apart because of people like him. Marcus nodded with understanding. Anger is justified, but you have to channel it productively. These phones recording everything? That's your power right there. Use it. The youngest man looked directly at one of the cameras. My name is David Chen. I'm 26 years old and I have 2 kids. This man, he pointed at Hawthorne, fired my father-in-law after 30 years of service. No severance, no warning, just a pink slip because his salary was too high. The tall man stepped forward. I'm Robert Martinez. My brother lost his job at Hawthorne Industries 6 months ago. He's had to move his family in with my parents because he can't find work that pays enough to cover his mortgage. The bearded man nodded. Tom Bradley. 3 generations of my family worked at that plant until this man decided our job should go overseas. The crowd murmured sympathetically. Several people lowered their phones but kept recording. The story was taking on a very different tone than anyone had expected. Marcus looked at Hawthorne expectantly. Your turn, Mr. Hawthorne. What do you want to say to these cameras about the decisions you've made? Richard Hawthorne stood frozen as dozens of phone cameras focused on him, waiting for his response. The silence stretched uncomfortably, broken only by the distant sound of approaching sirens. I don't have to justify business decisions to a mob, Hawthorne finally stammered, but his usual confidence was gone. Marcus shook his head. This isn't a mob, Mr. Hawthorne. These are your neighbors. This is your community. And those cameras represent thousands of people who are about to form their opinion of you and your company based on what happens in the next few minutes. The 3 men who had attacked Hawthorne watched Marcus with growing amazement. Without throwing a single punch, he had completely shifted the power dynamic in the room. Daddy? Emma called again, sliding out of the booth. Can I come over there? Stay where you are, sweetheart, Marcus replied gently. We're almost finished here. But Emma, with the fearless curiosity of an 8-year-old, walked over anyway. She stopped next to Marcus and looked up at the tall man, Robert Martinez. Are you sad? She asked innocently. Robert's tough exterior cracked. Yeah, little one. I'm sad and angry. My daddy says when I'm sad and angry I should use my words instead of hitting. Words are stronger than fists. The crowd murmured approvingly at her simple wisdom. Several people smiled despite the tension. Even the restaurant staff, who had been huddled near the kitchen doors, seemed charmed by the child's directness. Marcus put his hand on Emma's shoulder. "Emma, this is a grown-up conversation, but I want to help," she insisted. She turned to Hawthorne, her young face serious. "My daddy lost his job too. He was really sad, but he didn't hurt anybody. He just worked harder." Hawthorne looked down at her, and for the first time that evening, his expression softened slightly. "Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that seem mean," Emma continued, "but maybe they don't know how much it hurts people. Maybe if you tell them nicely, they'll try to be better." The restaurant fell completely silent. Even the approaching police sirens seemed to fade into the background as everyone absorbed the profound simplicity of a child's perspective. Tom Bradley, the bearded man, knelt down to Emma's eye level. "You know what, little lady? You're pretty smart," Emma beamed at the praise. "Daddy says I get that from my mommy. She's in heaven now, but she still helps me think good thoughts." The emotional impact of her words was visible on every face in the room. Robert Martinez wiped his eyes, trying to hide his tears. Marcus felt his own throat tighten. Emma rarely mentioned her mother spontaneously, and when she did, it always caught him off guard. "Your mommy sounds like she was a very wise person," David Chen said softly. "She was." Emma nodded. "She said that when people are mean, it's usually because they're scared or sad about something. Maybe Mr. Hawthorne is scared too." All eyes turned to the CEO, who looked completely unprepared for this level of emotional honesty from a child. The cameras captured every micro-expression on his face as he struggled with her innocent observation. Hawthorne started, then stopped. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I'm not—" "It's complicated, little girl. Business is complicated. But people aren't complicated," Emma replied with devastating simplicity. "People just want to take care of their families and be happy. That's what Daddy says." Marcus marveled at his daughter's wisdom, even as he worried about exposing her to this adult conflict. The police sirens grew louder, and through the restaurant's windows, they could see flashing lights approaching. "Mr. Hawthorne," Marcus said quietly, "the police are here. In about 30 seconds, you have to decide whether this ends with arrests and headlines, or whether it ends with everyone walking away with their dignity intact." Hawthorne looked around the room, at the 3 men who had attacked him, at the crowd with their cameras, at little Emma with her trusting eyes, and finally at Marcus, the unlikely peacekeeper who had prevented real violence. "What do you suggest?" he asked Marcus, his voice barely above a whisper. "I suggest you remember that those cameras are still rolling," Marcus replied. "And that little girl just gave you a gift, the benefit of the doubt. The question is whether you're going to prove her right about people being able to change." The restaurant door opened, and 2 police officers entered, their hands resting casually on their radios as they assessed the situation. "Evening, folks," the older officer said. "We got a call about a disturbance?" The moment of truth had arrived. Everyone looked at Hawthorne, waiting to see whether he would press charges or find a different path forward. Emma tugged on Hawthorne's expensive suit jacket. When he looked down at her, she smiled brightly. "I think you can be a good person if you try. My daddy says everyone deserves a second chance." The CEO stared at her for a long moment, and something fundamental seemed to shift in his expression. "Officer," Hawthorne said finally, his voice stronger than it had been all evening, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. These gentlemen and I were having a heated discussion about business matters, but no one was actually hurt." The 3 men exchanged surprised glances. David Chen stepped forward. "We may have gotten a little loud, officers, but Mr. Hawthorne is right. No one was hurt." The police officers looked skeptical. They could see the overturned chairs and broken glass, and they certainly noticed all the phones still recording. "Are you sure about that, sir?" the younger officer asked Hawthorne. "Because several people called in reports of an assault in progress." Marcus stepped forward, still keeping Emma close to his side. "Officers, I witnessed the entire incident. There was a confrontation, but it was resolved peacefully. No one was injured, and I don't believe anyone wants to press charges." The older officer studied Marcus carefully. Something in his bearing and the way he spoke suggested military background, which carried weight with the veteran policeman. "And you are?" "Marcus Thompson, Army veteran. This is my daughter Emma. We were just having dinner when this all started." Emma waved cheerfully at the officers. Hi, are you here to help? The tension in the room decreased noticeably at her innocent greeting. That's our job, sweetheart, the older officer replied with a smile. He turned back to the adults. So everyone's in agreement that this was just a verbal disagreement that got out of hand? The restaurant remained tense as everyone waited for the final resolution. Robert Martinez, Tom Bradley, and David Chen stood together, clearly nervous about the police presence despite Hawthorne's unexpected decision not to press charges. That's correct, officers, Hawthorne said, though his voice still carried traces of uncertainty. Just a business disagreement that got more heated than necessary. The younger police officer wasn't entirely convinced. Sir, we have multiple reports of physical contact and threats. Are you certain you don't want to file a complaint? Before Hawthorne could respond, Emma stepped forward with the fearless confidence only children possess. The grown-ups were just having big feelings, she announced to the officers. Sometimes when people are really worried about their families, they get scared and say things too loud. The older officer chuckled, despite the serious situation. Is that right, sweetheart? Uh-huh. My daddy taught me that when people are mean, they're usually just hurting inside. And when people are hurting, we should help them feel better, not make them feel worse. Marcus felt a surge of pride and amazement at his daughter's wisdom. She had somehow cut through all the adult complexity to the heart of the matter. Robert Martinez looked down at Emma with genuine admiration. You know what, little miss? You just taught this old construction worker something important. He turned to face the cameras that were still recording. I want everyone to know that I'm not proud of how I acted tonight. I let my anger control me instead of thinking about better ways to solve our problems. Tom Bradley nodded in agreement. Same here. My family didn't raise me to threaten people, no matter how angry I get. David Chen stepped forward. We were wrong to approach Mr. Hawthorne the way we did. But I hope people understand that we're desperate. Our whole community is hurting. Hawthorne watched this display of accountability with visible surprise. He glanced at the cameras, then at Emma, who was looking up at him with expectant eyes. I owe these men an apology too, he said slowly as if the words were foreign to him. My comments earlier tonight were insensitive. I was discussing business decisions without considering the human impact. Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out on Hawthorne's face, years of corporate ruthlessness warring against whatever conscience Emma's words had awakened. Mr. Hawthorne, Marcus said gently, actions speak louder than apologies. What do you mean? Emma tugged on his jacket again. He means you should do something nice to show you're sorry. Like when I break something, I have to help fix it. The simplicity of her solution drew murmurs of approval from the crowd. Several people were openly smiling at her innocent wisdom. Hawthorne knelt down to Emma's eye level, surprising everyone. What kind of something nice do you think I should do? Emma considered this seriously. Well, if you took away people's jobs, maybe you could give some back. Or help them find new ones? My daddy says when you make a mess, you clean it up. The restaurant fell silent as everyone processed this exchange. The police officers exchanged glances, clearly moved by the child's straightforward moral clarity. Out of the mouths of babes, the older officer murmured. Hawthorne stood up slowly, his expression thoughtful. You're suggesting I should take responsibility for the consequences of my business decisions. I'm suggesting, Marcus said carefully, that a real leader looks for ways to solve problems instead of just creating them. Robert Martinez stepped forward. Look, Mr. Hawthorne, we don't expect miracles. But maybe there's a middle ground between maximum profits and destroying lives. The plant closure, Tom Bradley added. It's not final yet. The equipment hasn't been sold. If there was a way to make it profitable again. David Chen nodded. We're not asking for charity. We're asking for a chance to prove that American workers can compete if they're given the right tools and support. Hawthorne looked around the room, taking in the faces of the people still recording, the hopeful expressions of the three men who had attacked him, and most importantly, Emma's bright, trusting eyes. I can't make any promises tonight, he said finally, but I can commit to having an honest conversation about alternatives to the current plan. The crowd stirred with cautious optimism. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was more than anyone had expected when the evening began. That's all we wanted, Robert said, a chance to be heard. The police officers seemed satisfied with the peaceful resolution. Well, if everyone's in agreement that this matter is settled, we'll be on our way. But folks, Next time you have a business disagreement, maybe try a conference room instead of a restaurant. The older officer winked at Emma. Thanks for helping the grown-ups remember how to use their words, sweetie. Emma giggled. You're welcome. Can I see your badge? As the officer showed her his badge, the tension in the room finally dissipated completely. People began putting away their phones, though many were already posting videos with captions praising the little peacemaker and her father. The restaurant manager approached their group cautiously. If everyone's staying, perhaps we could move to separate tables? And Mr. Hawthorne, your meal is complimentary tonight. Of course. Actually, Hawthorne said, looking at Marcus and Emma, I'd like to buy dinner for everyone involved in this discussion. It's the least I can do. Emma clapped her hands excitedly.
Does that mean we can have dessert, Daddy?
Marcus laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had all evening. I think we've all earned dessert tonight, Princess. As people began to settle back into their seats and the normal restaurant atmosphere gradually returned, Marcus reflected on the unexpected turn of events. He had come here simply to make his daughter happy with a nice dinner. Instead, he had prevented a violent confrontation, helped defuse a potentially explosive situation, and somehow facilitated the beginning of what might become genuine dialogue between bitter enemies. Most importantly, Emma had demonstrated a wisdom and compassion that humbled every adult in the room. Her innocent faith in people's capacity for goodness had accomplished more than any amount of force or confrontation could have achieved. 3 weeks after the incident at Milano's restaurant, Marcus received an unexpected phone call while stocking shelves during his night shift at the warehouse. Is this Marcus Thompson? The voice asked. Speaking. Who's this? Richard Hawthorne. We met at the restaurant a few weeks ago. Marcus nearly dropped the box he was holding. Mr. Hawthorne, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I imagine not. Listen, do you have a few minutes to talk? I have a proposition for you. Marcus glanced around the empty warehouse, then at his watch. It was nearly midnight, and he had 3 more hours of work ahead of him. I'm at work right now, but I can talk briefly. What's this about? That night at the restaurant, you demonstrated something I rarely see in the business world. Genuine leadership under pressure. You de-escalated a dangerous situation without violence, protected everyone involved, and somehow managed to turn enemies into people willing to have a conversation. Marcus wasn't sure where this was heading. I just did what seemed right at the time. Exactly. And that's why I'm calling. I've spent the past 3 weeks thinking about what your daughter said. About taking responsibility and cleaning up messes. She was right, you know. Marcus felt a surge of pride at the mention of Emma. She has a way of cutting through complicated things. She does indeed. Which brings me to my proposition. I've decided to restructure how Hawthorne Industries handles our workforce transitions. Instead of just cutting jobs, I want to create a program that retrains workers, helps them find new employment, and supports communities affected by plant closures. That sounds like a good start, Marcus said carefully. I need someone to run this program. Someone who understands what it's like to lose a job and struggle to provide for a family. Someone who knows how to work with people from all backgrounds. Someone who can build trust between management and workers. Marcus stopped stocking shelves entirely. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you the chance to make a real difference. The salary would be triple what you're making at your current jobs combined. Full benefits, college fund for Emma, and the resources to help hundreds of families transition successfully instead of just being discarded. The offer was almost too good to believe. Marcus had been struggling financially for years, working 2 jobs just to keep Emma fed and housed in a safe neighborhood. Why me? Marcus asked. You could hire someone with an MBA and corporate experience. Because MBAs don't know what it feels like to eat peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, so their children can have milk money for school. Corporate executives don't understand the dignity that comes from honest work, regardless of the pay scale, and they certainly don't have the moral authority to tell displaced workers that someone actually cares about their future. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the unexpected opportunity. There's more, Hawthorne continued. Robert Martinez, Tom Bradley, and David Chen, the 3 men from the restaurant, I've hired them as community liaisons for the program. They know their neighborhoods better than any consultant ever could. You hired the men who attacked you? The men who were desperate enough to risk everything for their families and communities. That kind of passion, properly channeled, is exactly what this program needs. Marcus thought about Emma, sleeping peacefully at home while he worked through the night to make ends meet. He thought about all the other single parents, struggling families, and dedicated workers who deserved better than being treated as disposable. When would you need an answer? Take your time. But Marcus, I want you to know something. That night at the restaurant changed me. Your daughter's simple wisdom about cleaning up messes and giving people second chances, it made me realize I'd spent years creating problems instead of solving them. What made you decide to actually do something about it? Hawthorne was quiet for a moment. The videos, dozens of them, posted online from that night. But they weren't focused on the confrontation or the drama. They were all about Emma. 8-year-old teaches CEO about compassion. Little girl's wisdom stops restaurant fight. Child shows adults how to solve problems with kindness. Marcus smiled, picturing Emma's reaction when she inevitably saw those videos. The comments were even more powerful. Hawthorne continued. Thousands of people sharing stories about their own job losses, their own struggles, their own children asking difficult questions about why daddy doesn't have work anymore. I realized I wasn't just making business decisions. I was affecting real families, real children like Emma. She'll be proud to know she made a difference. I hope I can make her proud too, by proving that adults can learn and change. Will you consider the offer? Marcus looked around the warehouse, thinking about the future he could provide for Emma with this opportunity. More importantly, he thought about the chance to help other families avoid the struggles they'd endured. I'll consider it seriously, he promised. Good. There's one more thing. I'd like Emma to be the first recipient of the Children's Scholarship Fund we're establishing. Full ride to any college she chooses when the time comes. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Mr. Hawthorne, that's incredibly generous, but it's not generosity. It's an investment in the future. That little girl has wisdom that most adults never develop. The world needs more people like her. After ending the call, Marcus finished his shift in a daze. The possibility of finally being able to provide Emma with security, opportunities, and a father who wasn't exhausted from working 2 jobs was almost overwhelming. When he got home at dawn, Emma was already awake, sitting at their small kitchen table with her homework spread out. Morning, Daddy. How was work? Marcus sat down beside her, marveling at her cheerful energy despite the early hour. It was interesting, Princess. Very interesting. Good interesting or bad interesting? I think it might be very good interesting. How would you feel if Daddy got a different job? One that helped families like the people we met at the restaurant? Emma's eyes lit up. You mean you could help sad people feel better? Like you did that night? Something like that. Emma threw her arms around his neck. That would be perfect, Daddy. Mommy always said helping others is the most important job anyone can have. As Marcus held his daughter close, he realized that sometimes the most profound changes in life come from the simplest acts of courage and compassion. 3 weeks ago, he had been a struggling single father working 2 jobs just to survive. Now he had the opportunity to transform not just his own life, but the lives of countless other families facing similar struggles. All because an 8-year-old girl believed that everyone deserved a second chance, and had the courage to say so when it mattered most. That afternoon, Marcus called Richard Hawthorne and accepted the position. 6 months later, the Hawthorne Family Transition Program had helped over 300 displaced workers find new employment or receive training for emerging industries. The program became a model for other corporations, and Marcus found himself speaking at conferences about the importance of treating workforce transitions with dignity and compassion. Emma, now 9 and even wiser, often accompanied him to these events. She had become something of a celebrity in her own right, known for her simple but profound observations about kindness and second chances. But her favorite part was still the letters they received from families whose lives had been changed by the program, families who now had hope instead of desperation, opportunity instead of despair. Daddy, she said one evening as they read through the latest batch of thank you letters, do you think we really helped clean up that mess? Marcus looked at his remarkable daughter, still amazed by her wisdom and compassion. I think we helped, Princess. But more importantly, I think we proved that when people work together and treat each other with kindness, there's no mess too big to clean up. Emma smiled and returned to her letters, already planning new ways to help even more families. After all, as she frequently reminded anyone who would listen, everyone deserves a second chance to do better.